Biodiversity, short for biological diversity, simply means that all life is different. The Earth is home to organisms that have different genes, live in different habitats, and function in different ecosystems. Scientists study three main types of biodiversity: species, genetic, and ecosystem. A species is a group of genetically distinct organisms that can have offspring. To date, over 1.7 million species have been named, and new kinds of plants, animals, fungi, and microorganisms are being discovered all the time. Scientists have predicted that there are between 3 and 30 million species on Earth. Genetic biodiversity means that the genes within a species vary. For example, all dogs belong to the same species, but there are many different breeds that have genes for different traits such as size, color, and coat type. Ecosystem biodiversity means that ecosystems, communities of living things, are different from one another. For example, some ecosystems are warm and wet like tropical rainforests, and others are cold and dry like Arctic tundras. Biodiversity is not consistent from place to place. Because warm areas are able to support so many different kinds of life, places near the equator tend to have a high amount of biodiversity, while areas near the poles have a much lower biodiversity. Biodiversity is important because all species in an ecosystem have a role to play. When one or more of these species is eliminated, an ecosystem's balance will suffer, and other species are forced to migrate or become extinct. A diverse ecosystem is strong and able to withstand natural disasters, disease, and drought. With an estimated 1/3 of all species in danger of extinction, habitat conservation is more important than ever.
When we talk about biodiversity, Guyana may be one of the top countries in the world, offering a large assortment of species for fauna and flora. Guyana has become famous for its naturally gifted environment. Over 70% of the country's natural habitat remains pure and pristine, unlike most of its South American neighbors. This week on Dorado Shines, you will learn more about the steps that are being taken to revise the draft version of Guyana's third National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. To further address this, a stakeholders consultation organized by the Environmental Protection Agency, better known as EPA, was held on July 15.
Biological diversity contributes a great amount to the Guyanese economy through the provision of jobs and economic benefits, especially in the sectors of agriculture, forestry, fishing, and related sectors. In 2012, this accounted for approximately $67,000 million to the GDP. The biodiversity found in the forest ecosystem, for example, and in many others, form the basis for the services that they provide. These include supporting services such as acting as a carbon sink, acting in seed dispersals, provisioning services such as providing for food, water, medicine, raw materials, regulating services such as regulating climate and waste decomposition, cultural services such as non-material benefits for recreation, and of course aesthetic enjoyment.
Based on the feedback that we've gotten from the stakeholders that were present there, as well as those that were unable to attend, we're taking those comments into consideration and now looking at reviewing the document. Also, based on the remarks by the minister, he felt that the document needed to be more innovative and basically looking more to the future. So the whole vision of the document has changed since, and the consultants are basically looking to now revise the document. The key objectives of this document, it's really about mainstreaming biodiversity into the development sectors. It's not just about production, it's about development on the whole. We're not just talking mining, environmental sectors, we're talking about health, we're talking about education as well.
Biodiversity, the variability among living organisms from all sources including terrestrial, marine and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are a part, This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. The general public is hereby informed that an auction of medium-scale parcels will be held on Wednesday, July 30, 2014 at 10 hours at the Guyana Girl Guides Association Building, Upper Brickdam, Georgetown. Interested persons must consult the relevant maps which are on display at the GGMC head office, mining stations, and at the GGDMA office to ascertain their area or areas of interest. Persons can acquire copies of the auction maps at a cost of $3,000 per sheet. General requirements: successful bidders will be required to pay the bid price plus 3% auction dues immediately at the end of the auction. No late payment will be accepted. Allottees are required to file an application for the block awarded by September 10, 2014. Applications not filed would result in the award being considered to have lapsed. The GGMC will provide the required maps and cartographic descriptions of all properties for application purposes. A copy of the application procedures for prospecting permits, medium scale, can be obtained from the GGMC head office. All allocations are final. Speaking at the event, Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment Robert Prasad pointed out that while a lot has been done with respect to protecting and preserving Guyana's biodiversity, more needs to be done to ensure that the new strategy and action plan is futuristic.
It is important that we're also compliant with our international obligations, both in terms of reporting, not only in terms of reporting, but in ensuring that we have implementation. And it is the expectation that the team that is working to develop the draft and ultimately the strategy and the action plan will deliver a document that speaks to immediate challenges and opportunities that we face in issues as it relates to our biodiversity. Also, one in which that can take the country forward, and one that matches, and I heard Patsy referring to that, one that matches the developmental thrust of the country, and one that responds to the priorities, the aspirations, and also the needs of the people of Guyana.
The current document, the current draft document, essentially looks at activities that are ongoing right now, that are going on right now, or just up and coming and that people already know about. It's not really futuristic. It doesn't look towards, beyond 2020. And the document it's a strategy and action plan. So there is a timeline. So it's for 2012 to 2020. But with a vision, you're supposed to look beyond that. You're supposed to look towards, achieving something that you may not achieve during that time, but you're still supposed to make plans for it. So basically, that's what he meant. He wanted to see that the document had more innovative activities and objectives and looks towards something new for Guyana.
The onus is upon us to determine what our priorities are, and in knowing what our national targets need to be in order to address the sustainable use and conservation of our biodiversity. It is clear that the value of biodiversity is key to economic development and human well-being. The conservation and use of our natural resources and the implementation of this biodiversity strategy and action plan must be viewed not as a cost or a limitation, but as a potential for continuing on the new development pathway that Guyana is on. It should be based on effective partnerships, environmental integrity, and human health. As a focal agency to the Convention on Biological Diversity, the EPA is truly pleased with the support from our Minister, and we thank I would like to thank him for making time from his busy schedule to be present today. The support from his office and the ministry has shown that this strategy and action plan will surely become a guiding document for several initiatives in the country.
Pointing to existing policies such as the Low Carbon Development Strategy (LCDS) and the many international protocols and conventions which Guyana has signed on to, the minister observed that the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan is needed in a form for the country to uphold those obligations.
We've done incrementally many things that would put us in very good standing and put us in a very good position. And many of these things that we've accomplished and we're able to implement sometimes take on notice by ourselves as people, but also do not get the type of international recognition. But we will continue to press on, so it's not only about recognition, but it's more importantly is about getting the job done and doing what we're supposed to be doing. So what have we been doing in recent times? We've looked from the policy standpoint, guided by the Low Carbon Development Strategy, which has given us that broader framework, reinforce previous and even current initiatives in terms of where we want to go the country and how it is we will utilize and develop our resources for the immediate as well, medium and long term. So we have that vision, we have that framework. We've looked in terms of what do we do legislative-wise. We've passed through our National Assembly, some successfully, others have been stalled, in terms of deriving the type of legislation that we need that will reinforce our effectiveness in the country in properly utilizing and managing the abundant wealth that we have and that we possess.
With the low carbon development strategy, there's a joint concept note, which is basically the agreement with Norway. And I was referring to the fifth national report earlier. The fifth national report basically reports on the implementation of a strategy and action plan like this. And then the fifth national report is actually a requirement of the Norway agreement, so the joint concept note. So it ties completely with the LCDS. It's actually sort of a string on the side, but it's also, it's needed. In addition to that, of course, the LCDS is talking about, the low carbon development. You're talking about, sustaining the forest, sustainable use of forest products and so on. And similarly with the NBSAP, it's that overarching document that will look at everything biodiversity, which forest falls under.
Guyana signed the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity, UNCBD, in June 1992 and subsequently ratified it in August 1994. The Convention on Biological Diversity provides a global legal framework for action on biodiversity. Since it is scientifically conclusive that one of the major contributors to global warming is tropical deforestation, Guyana has cemented its belief that addressing this issue has now become one of the global priorities for combating climate change.
As every other income earner, persons engaged in gold and diamond mining must honor their tax obligations. Miners who employ operators, cooks, divers, and other tributers, as they are commonly known, are required to deduct 10% of the 30% income tax from the earnings of tributars and remit same to the GRA. Tributars are required to pay the 20% balance of taxes to the GRA on or before April 30 of each year where applicable. For more information, call 227-6060 extensions 1200 to 1204.
The general public is hereby informed that an auction of medium-scale parcels will be held on Wednesday, July 30, 2014 at 10 hours at the Guyana Girl Guides Association Building, Upper Brickdam, Georgetown. Interested persons must consult the relevant maps which are on display at the GGMC head office, mining stations, and at the GGDMA office to ascertain their area or areas of interest. Persons can acquire copies of the auction maps at a cost of $3,000 per sheet. General requirements: Successful bidders will be required to pay the bid price plus 3% auction dues immediately at the end of the auction. No late payment will be accepted. Allottees are required to file an application for the block awarded by September 10, 2014. Applications not filed would result in the award being considered to have lapsed. The GGMC will provide the required maps and cartographic descriptions of all properties for application purposes. A copy of the application procedures for prospecting permits medium scale can be obtained from the GGMC head office. All allocations are final. The convention brings together the international stakeholders every 2 years, or as needed, to review progress in the implementation of the convention, to adopt programs of work to achieve its objectives, and provide policy guidance.
This document is really important because it's essentially a policy instrument. And of course the ministry therefore and everyone should have a vested interest in it, because through this strategy and action plan, I mean, policies and laws can be brought about because of it. So I suppose that, of course, that's why it's under so much scrutiny at this point, and especially because the minister made remarks, to that degree, that he wants to see it, as a more futuristic, as a living process, and that's what it should be. It should be a living process to, because obviously development for Guyana will not stop at 2020. It will continue beyond that. So it has to encompass all those elements of development for 2020 and beyond. So based on that, my understanding that the ministry will want to see something much more innovative, creative, and something that will really be a driving force, similar to the LCDS, something that will be really a driving force to development in Guyana.
The main goals of the convention are the conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of the components of biodiversity, and sharing the benefits arising from the commercial and other utilization of genetic resources in a fair and equitable way. These goals are addressed through work on agricultural, inland waters, marine and coastal, forest, dry and subhumid lands, island and mountain biodiversity. Other areas of work cover the rapidly evolving field of biotechnology, address technology development and transfer benefit sharing and biosafety. A protected area is a geographically defined area which is designated or regulated and managed to achieve specific conservation objectives. The general public is hereby informed that an auction of medium-scale parcels will be held on Wednesday, July 30, 2014 at 10 hours at the Guyana Girl Guides Association Building, Upper Brickdam, Georgetown. Interested persons must consult the relevant maps which are on display at the GGMC head office, mining stations, and at the GGDMA office to ascertain their area or areas of interest. Persons can acquire copies of the auction maps at a cost of $3,000 per sheet. General requirements: successful bidders will be required to pay the bid price plus 3% auction dues immediately at the end of the auction. No late payment will be accepted. Allottees are required to file an application for the block awarded by September 10, 2014. Applications not filed would result in the award being considered to have lapsed. The GGMC will provide the required maps and cartographic descriptions of all properties for application purposes. A copy of the application procedures for prospecting permits medium scale can be obtained from the GGMC head office. All allocations are final.
widespread dumping of garbage is unhealthy and dangerous to the environment.
And environmental effects of garbage. Numerous to consider. Garbage harbors vermins and disease-carrying agents such as mosquitoes. And one can reflect on the issue of chikungunya and other diseases such as malaria. We know the garbage cans, the empty drink caps, the empty drink cans, they allow mosquitoes to breed. And that is obviously will have an impact on the health of people in and around Georgetown, the city. Not only disease-carrying agents, but things like plastic, the PET bottles, they carry toxins, and they actually absorb toxins. They act like sponge, and when they end up into the rivers and waterways, these toxins are released into the environment.
There is a better way.
They're looking at potential interest to set up a recycling plant in Guyana, and a very huge recycling plant. And that plant will actually accommodate all sorts of garbage, including waste from industry. We're looking at things like the paddy husks and so on, the poultry waste, manure and stuff like that, in addition to the bottles and the plastics and what's not. And converting these into products that they themselves can actually, sell back in the air. And there are also technologies that are aware, and the EPA is looking at that as well. When we're going out to our regular industrial compliance visits and so on, we're encouraging them to adopt green technologies. So, for example, a swine rearing operation can install a simple biodigester that collects the waste, and that is formed methane, and it can be burned and used as an alternative energy source. I mean, what we're doing is just now providing the opportunities for people to start thinking along these lines, and hopefully we can work out some form of fashion to encourage them to adopt those technologies.
Keeping our surroundings clean means lower health risks, less clogged drains, and a safe place for both business and pleasure. To help us achieve this, new litter prevention regulations are now in place.
The litter enforcement regulations were enacted earlier this year under the Environmental Protection Act. And it really represents a significant achievement, not just for the agency and by extension the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, but it's also a major achievement for Guyana because it represents to date the most comprehensive piece of legislation addressing littering in Guyana. Prior to the regulations being enacted, there were bits and pieces of legislation that dealt with certain aspects of littering in a piecemeal fashion, but there was no single piece of legislation that comprehensively criminalized litter activities and litter-related activities in Guyana. So in that respect, the regulations serve as a major achievement for the country. Under the regulations, deposit is defined very widely. So it's wide enough in its scope to cover a situation not only where a person actually physically deposits litter in a public place, but also where through their words or conduct cause litter to be deposited. So that would include situations where, for instance, a business person recruits a vagrant to dispose of litter and gives him no instructions in terms of where would be an adequate place to dispose of this litter. In that situation, the legislation envisages that the business person, and not necessarily the vagrant alone, is the person who can actually be issued with a charge. In the wake of the implementation of the litter regulations, I am extremely proud to say that we have seen much success in terms of our actual enforcement mechanisms. We have had cause to issue close to 100 citations under the regulations, primarily to business owners, authorizing them or instructing them to clean up their surroundings within a specified time frame or face the possibility of court action. Recently, we even had a situation where a business owner was brought before the purview of the courts and was made to pay $130,000 in fines, $100,000 for actually littering, and then $30,000 for attempting to bribe a litter warden. So in that respect, we have seen much success in terms of the actual enforcement mechanisms under the regulation.
To learn more about the new litter prevention regulations, visit the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment's website at www.nre.gov.gy and click on the link Pick It Up Guyana.
As every other income earner, persons engaged in gold and diamond mining must honor their tax obligations. Miners who employ operators, cooks, divers, and other tributers, as they are commonly known, are required to deduct 10% of the 30% income tax from the earnings of tributers and remit same to the GRA. Tributors are required to pay the 20% balance of taxes to the GRA on or before April 30 of each year where applicable. For more information, call 227-6060 extensions 1200 to 1204.
Check us out on the internet for this and every episode of Dorado Shines. Just go to YouTube, search for Dorado Shines and start watching, or like us on Facebook and receive instant updates. You've been watching Dorado Shines. Do join us again next week for another program. Until then, do remember that we all have a role to play in protecting the environment.